Worthy contender. 10 reasons why Jane Foster is the best Thor, and 10 reasons why the Odysseus is. With the Odysseus finally reclaiming the mantle of Thor, we debate which god of thunder was truly the best. But before that, make sure to subscribe our channel for further updates. Even before his silver screen debut, Thor Odinson, aka the God of Thunder, was one of Marvel Comics' most popular characters. Wielding his signature hammer, Mjolnir, Thor Odinson brought the bit of mythology that Marvel readers in 1962 wanted. He went on to become an important member of the Avengers and an iconic hero. For decades, Thor was synonymous with the image of muscular Nordic man throwing lightning bolts. And then in 2014, Marvel did something big. They gave Thor's longtime love interest, Jane Foster, Mjolnir. When Odysseus, Thor proved to be unworthy. Jane was forced to pick up the mantle, both literally and physically, and became the new Thor. For the next 4 years, Jane's Thor starred in multiple series, including the very popular Mighty Thor series. She was even a member of the Avengers for a time, where she became a fan-favorite hero and a staple on the Marvel comic scene. Thor Odinson is the original version of Thor, and we respect that. Still, there is something to be said for Jane Foster's Thor, who represents the revitalized version of the famous character. In order to get a more accurate look at these characters, CBR is going over the reasons why Odinson makes a better Thor and the reasons why Jane Foster makes a better Thor. By better, we mean a variety of things. Level of power, personality, and individual history in the comics are a few of the many things we are taking into account for our list. As always, if you don't agree with our list, let us know. Tell us why you think Odinson or Jane Foster makes a better Thor. Jane, Loki proof. One of the Odysseus' biggest flaws as Thor was his persistent willingness to forgive his brother Loki. We get it. They are family. It's natural for Odinson to look past the many terrible things Loki has done. Still, because they are family, Loki is frequently able to trick the unsuspecting Odinson. Loki wins all his battles via manipulation. With Jane Foster as Thor, that manipulation falls flat. In the Mighty Thor series, Loki fooled Jane all of one time. After that, she never trusted him again. Loki is still a threat to Jane, but without the familial bond he shares with Odysseus, the threat isn't nearly as potential. 19. Odinson slightly less impulsive. We made sure to put slightly here because in all honesty, neither Jane Foster's Thor nor Odysseus' Thor is apt to think things through by throwing a hammer. No Thor is known for their cautionary intelligence. However, compared to Jane Foster's Thor, Odinson proves to have a slight edge over his mortal counterpart. We definitely think Jane's caution to the wind attitude is useful in some situations, but it can also be really dangerous. Since Jane always knew her time as Thor would eventually end, she frequently acted first and thought later. Since Odinson is immortal, he is less prone to rashness. 18. Jane's different perspective. In the beginning, a lot of fans didn't like Jane Foster's Thor. For readers who enjoyed the classic Odinson version of Thor, this new Thor was a huge change. Gone was the buff god and in his place was a cancer-riddled woman. It could have been terrible, but it wasn't. Over time, even the most resilient haters came to realize how perfect Jane was for the role of Thor. Yes, she's different than the typical Thor image of a brownie guy. However, instead of that difference hurting her character, it helps it. Jane's illness forces readers and writers to question what being Thor entails. It gives dimension to a superhero who lacks depth for many years. 17. Odinson experience. Odinson has been Thor for hundreds of years. Yes, Jane handles Mjolnir better than he does, but he still has a lot more experience than she does. But he's gone up against tons of different villains and learned how to defeat them, which is something Jane never really got to opportunity to do since she wasn't Thor for a very long. There are some things you are born with and there are some things you have to learn over time. Even though Jane proved to be a successful version of Thor, she never had the same fighting skills or foe know-how that Odinson had. She was a natural Thor, but Odinson will always have time on his side. 16. Jane knows both Midgard and Asgard. Of course, Odinson is familiar with Midgard aka Earth, but he hasn't half as knowledgeable as Jane. Even though he technically Thor's duty extends only to protecting Asgard, everyone knows that with that much power, it's only right to try and protect a few realms at once. Jane has lived on both Asgard and Midgard and has done extremely well in the both environments. As Thor, her intimate knowledge of both Earth customs and Asgardian tradition helps her tremendously. No matter where she is, she's able to use her understanding of different societies to aid her in battle. Odinson knows Midgard, but this knowledge of basic Earth customs is frequently mocked in the comics. As an Earthling, Jane Foster has Odinson beat in the Midgard department. 15. Odinson more knowledge of weapons. Odinson doesn't just know Jolly, he's familiar with hundreds of different Asgardian weapons and forges. After Jane threw Jolnir into the sun, effectively ending it, Odinson took back up the mantle of Thor sans hammer. In Jolnir's place, he had a long lineage of different hammers made. Though none truly measures up the Jolnir, Odinson's willingness to use different weapons shows a level of expertise we don't see in Zane. Zane knows Jolnir better than anyone, but her reliance on the famous hammer means she hasn't been able to try different weapons. She also hasn't received half of the weapon training Odinson has, so we are going to assume she doesn't really know her way around an X like Odinson does. 14. Zane always defiant. Sometimes Jane's defiant nature gets her in trouble, but it's also something that makes her version of Thor so revolutionary. Odinson's connection to his father and to other Asgardians sometimes comes before his duties as Thor, which is understandable. Asgard is his home, and Asgardians are his people. Jane loves Asgard as well, but she doesn't have the same connection to it as Odinson does. Where Odinson may struggle to rebel against the ordinary order, Jane reveals in it. During her Spotlight series, Mighty Thor, Jane punches a wayward Odin and throws a moon-sized piece of rock on him. If she doesn't think something is wrong, she is going to react even if that means disrespecting gods. 13. Odinson unbreakable ties to Asgard. Where you are raised has a lot to do with who you become later in life. For most of her life, Jane lived on Earth before briefly moving to Asgard to act as a representative for Midgard. She knows Earth extremely well, much better than Odinson. In turn, Odinson knows Asgard much better than Zane since that's where he was raised. In some ways, Asgard is Odinson's whole life. That's where his family and friends are. As Thor, it's the place he swore to protect. Jane also has a connection to Asgard thanks to her short time there, but compared to Odinson, it's paltry. Odinson will always know more about the mystical realm than Zane, which gives his version of Thor a slight edge over Zane's Thor. 12. Zane humanity. Ordinarily in comics, being a normal human detracts from your superhero status. However, we think in Jane Foster's case, her humanity gives her a slight edge over Odinson where it comes to taking the title of Thor. See, for Zane, she knew that her time as Thor was limited. Unlike Odinson, her days were always numbered. Without Jolnir and its transformatory powers, she was patient struggling with breast cancer. It was this knowledge of her foreseeable and that encouraged her to push herself especially hard. During her stint as Thor, you can tell that she's really trying to accomplish as much as possible because even in her ageless Thor body, she's in tune with her own humanity. 11. Odinson immortality. Odinson won't live forever, but he will live for a very long time. In Mighty Thor at the Gates of Valhalla, #1, we saw an aged Odinson who was facing the end of time. That means for all those thousands of years in between now and then, Odinson was Thor. He was the one fighting evil, protecting the 9 realms and fostering peace. His immortality gives the Thor title some consistency. He may lack the freshness that Jane offers, but there's something to be said for an unwavering presence. There always need to be a Thor, and Jane cannot always be there. Odinson can. 10. Jane's secret identity. For years, Thor and Odinson were inseparable. Thor became a single person instead of a title bestowed on anyone proven to be worthy. It wasn't until Jane Foster that things began to change. Unlike Odinson, Jane Foster always wore a mask when in Thor mode. She kept her identity a secret from most of everyone all the way up until the end. For other characters in the comics, Jane's secret forced them to step back and consider what the title of Thor means. Before, it was so intrinsically linked to Odinson that it almost lost some of its meaning. By keeping her identity a secret to her fellow heroes, Jane made being Thor more about Jolnir and less about herself. 9. Odinson was unworthy. As counterintuitive as it may seem, we think Odinson's time as the unworthy Thor actually makes him a better worthy Thor. With Jolnir gone, Odinson isn't technically worthy again, but he has taken the title back from Jane, who is currently undergoing cancer treatment. During that previous era when Jane was Thor, Odinson had to come to terms with his own unworthiness, which is for someone who was worthy for hundreds of years isn't an easy task. He had to dig deep and think about what makes a good Thor. Now that he's back as Thor, Odinson is definitely measuring his steps a little more carefully. Being Thor isn't something to take lightly, and we think Odinson finally understands that. 8. Zane willing to sacrifice. Every superhero knows what it means to sacrifice. They all make huge sacrifices, from forfeiting romances to giving up their restful 8 hours each night. Sacrificing is a part of being a hero, but Jane Foster takes it a step further. At the end of her Mighty Thor series, Jane throws Mjolnir into the sun in order to get rid of Asgard of the tyrannical Mangog. The destruction of Mjolnir also meant the loss of her powers. At the time, Odinson didn't understand how she could throw away both the title of Thor and her own life just to save Asgard. He slowly came to terms with her decision, but for Jane, it hardly even was a decision. She knew it was the only way to save people, so she did it. 7. Odinson, a true god. If you have watched Thor Ragnarok, you already have well accounted with Odinson's good potential. After he lost his Mjolnir, Odinson must learn to channel his lightning power sans hammer. Eventually, he becomes even stronger than he was before, and it's all thanks to his royal blood. As the son of Odin and Zod, Odinson was always destined to be extremely powerful. Whether he picked up Mjolnir or not, he has the ability of God, which helped him make Mjolnir powered form stronger than Zane. Without his trusty hammer, Odinson can still control the weather, but with notably less control. Still, compared to Zane, who has zero powers, were hammerless, that's pretty impressive. 6. Jane Faith. Being Thor is no small thing. It's a huge job that requires someone who is completely dedicated to using their immense power for the betterment of society. When Odinson proved unworthy, Jane picked up Mjolnir not because she simply wanted to, but because she knew the world needed a Thor. She has immense faith in the title of Thor. We are pretty sure after a few hundred years of working the rounds on Asgard and Earth, Jane wouldn't have near the faith she had at the beginning of her time as Thor. The job wears on people. Just look at Odinson. If you want an example of this, still for the time we saw her as a Thor, Jane always proved how beneficial a strong belief in the importance of Thor can be. 5. Odinson's connection. In the superhero business, it helps to have friends. After all, you can't fight every battle solo. Odinson has a long list of superpowered allies including Iron Man, Captain America, Bruce Banner and Lady Sif. He served as an Avenger for a long time and has earned his place among the Earth's most noteworthy heroes. If he ever needs a help, there's always someone who can be there at a moment's notice. During her time as Thor, Jane also racked up few superhero friends including Miss Marvel and Falcon. Still, she can't really compete with Odinson because of the difference in time. Jane was an Avenger for a few years, while Odinson was an Avenger for decades. In modern times, Odinson has much bigger network and more impressive LinkedIn. 4. Jane, stronger connection to Mjolnir. This one might seem a little controversial, but we promise you it's canon. Even the unworthy Odinson commented on Jane's handling of Mjolnir, saying her connection to the famous hammer was even stronger than his own. Whether you like it or not, Jane Foster knew Mjolnir better than anyone else. We finished this firsthand in the numerous unknown abilities Jane discovers while Thor. She perfects Mjolnir fight and finds out that Hammer is actually scientist and can do things like impersonate people and communicate with Jane. As Thor, a strong bond with Mjolnir is required. In terms of Mjolnir handling, Jane beats Odinson. 3rd, Odinson future lineage. In Mighty Thor, at the gates of Valhalla, #1, we got to see Odinson's future lineage firsthand. The goddesses of thunder, as they call themselves, are Odinson's future granddaughters. Like their grandfather, this trio of sisters can control the weather with or without their fancy weapons. Future timeliners aren't set in stone, but the goddess of thunder gave us realistic prediction of the future of the Thor. As Odinson eventually ages and weakens, he'll be able to give the mantle of Thor to his family. His divine blood ensures that his successors don't necessarily need a magical hammer to gain electrifying powers, something that Jane Foster couldn't guarantee. 2. Jane, love of life. After living for a really long time, life becomes a little lackluster. To say the least, Odinson is pretty much immortal and has been Thor for an incredibly long time. Jane, on the other hand, was only Thor for a few years, so a few months in comics. As a mortal with life-threatening disease, she appreciates every second she has. Unlike Odinson, Jane approaches her time as Thor with intense energy and will. She refuses to leave any mission half-finished or any person unsaved. When life is put on timer, it becomes something precious that needs to be enjoyed. Number 1. Odinson minus Mjolnir. This one is probably the thing that gives Odinson his biggest advantage over Jane Foster. Without Mjolnir, Jane has no powers. Once she sacrificed the hammer, she becomes an ordinary mortal again. Without Zolnir, Odinson is still a god with the ability to control the weather. Is he a lot more powerful with Zolnir? Of course, everyone who ever held Zolnir becomes more powerful than they were before. Still, sans hammer, Odinson's ability far outweighs Zayn's. While Zayn had Zolnir, she was undoubtedly an amazing Thor. But for Odinson, even when he doesn't have Zolnir, he's still a Thor.